Okay, so can you please take a seat? We're going to resume our discussions. Thank you. So I'd like to get started on panel 3. So panel 3 will focus on defense industry, military capabilities. It will be moderated by Isabella Antinozzi from Rusi. And our speakers will be Dominique Trinquant, who's the former head of the French military mission at the UN, Tim Rowntree, who's the former OCCAR director, and Nicolas Richoux, former head of the French military mission in Germany. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome back. I hope you are feeling refreshed after the coffee break. We are officially one panel away from the drinks reception, so hopefully that will help us go through and survive this last session. Today we are discussing the industrial side of the war in Ukraine. Now, for many of you who have been following the conflict, I shouldn't need to elaborate on the importance of industrial capacity to Ukraine's ability to resist the Russian aggression. European partners have played are playing a key role in enabling Ukraine's capacity to resist, but European defense industry is facing its own challenges, especially when it comes to production capacity and keeping up with the pace and the demand from Ukraine. So it is with great pleasure today that we'll be discussing these very complicated matters with a stellar panel of people who have done some exemplary work in the field of defense industry and international arms cooperation. I have prepared a set of questions for each of the speakers because I am a very annoying lady. So please don't hold it against me. And General Trinquant, I would like to start with you. You have, throughout your career, been exposed to different conflicts and participated in different operations in Lebanon, former Yugoslavia, and Africa. And so my question to you would be, how is this conflict different, and what would you say are the main lessons from Ukraine at a capability level for NATO allies? Also, I've been asked by a very feisty lady if you could speak right into your microphone, please. The floor is yours.
Okay, I will do. Thank you very much for inviting me and inviting me to speak specifically on this question. Personal point of view, on the 24th of February, for me it was a nightmare because prior to the 90s, between 96 and 98, I was planning officer at the 2nd French Corps in Germany, and I was planning the reinforcement of NATO central group in the Fulda, region. And suddenly, last year, I saw what we have prepared happening. And I thought that after 30 years, we'll no longer have this problem. But to answer directly to your question, in fact, I think NATO have 3 reactions: short-term, mid-term, and long-term, which is not only NATO. The short-term are the decisions which have been taken in Brussels and in Madrid, which were to reinforce the first line, the front, with 4 more battle groups, mainly in Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, to reinforce what was already in place. That's the short term. Immediately you put troops in the front line. In the medium term, you've got 2 sorts of questions. Probably, first, being able to reinforce the battle group at the level of a brigade. Secondly, have a reinforcement capacity of 300,000 soldiers. Just remind you that when we were talking 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about capacity around 65,000, and we are not able to manage to have 65,000. Now we are at 300,000. So we are back exactly at where we were in the 90s. These are the two reactions, short-term, medium-term. The long-term reaction is that just keep in mind that NATO is made of European, US and Canada. And the reinforcement has to be done by European country, meaning that they have to change their plan in defense term, in money, in capacities. And because of this crisis, within NATO, you are reinforcing the European side of NATO, meaning that whatever happens in 4 or 5 years' time, the US being more focused on Asia, for example, European will be stronger. And that means that indirectly, defense of Europe, I'm not talking about European army, I'm talking about defense of Europe is increasing, and indirectly, this reinforcement on the long term will mean that Europe will be stronger to defend itself. So these are the 3 layers which have been provoked by the aggression. But I just add one point. I wanted to put it forward, but I just add one point. I just want to focus on the big success of Mr. Putin, which is the resurrection of NATO. It was not probably the aim for Mr. Putin, but this happened in terms of strength, as I described, but also in terms of number of countries. I'm talking about Finland. And so you have a complete border along the Russian border, which is NATO now. So I hope that I answer your question.
Thank you. I think you made a couple of really good points, especially the one about NATO being the sum of its parts, really, and about us needing a sort of a stronger European pillar of NATO. I think this has been a mantra for now quite a long time, and as you said, probably one of the good things that Putin has done has been like just bringing this conversation back with a new sense of urgency and sort of reawakening NATO from, I think it was Macron, your president, who said it's brain death. So at least there's that. Tim, you have worked closely with industry to deliver collaborative defense programs, especially during your time at OCA. And so I was wondering how well equipped is European industry to respond to these new military requirements, and most importantly, how can international collaboration, international cooperation help the lack of sovereign industrial capability?
Okay, thank you, Isabella. Can everybody hear me through the microphone? Is that working? Good. Thank you. First of all, everybody, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody here for speaking in English, because I'm not bilingual in French, so thank you very much. I know it's an extra layer of complexity for you. Thank you. It's let me go straight to the core of the question then, Isabella. It's going to be tough, but in my experience and everything I've seen through my work, we have some excellent industry capabilities in Europe, spanning right across the defence capability spectrum. So at a technical level, and through international cooperation, as you say, these industries are very well equipped to respond to this challenge, given time, and indeed future potential challenges to the world order. However, there is always a but. In my view, the conditions to enable industry success are not in place. Industry is actually blocked from being able to be successful. Some significant changes are needed, and I'd like to offer some thoughts on those. This war, I'll just rewind a little bit to some background. So This war changes everything in the defence and security space, as we've heard through the excellent presentations today. Just 18 months ago, I would never have imagined that we'd be sitting here in the face of such a massive and unprovoked attack against a European nation. And I find it incredible that in the information age, Russia has managed to sufficiently control the narrative, not only within Russia, but also amongst a sizable part of the international community, to enable this act of aggression to at least continue. This demands a whole new way of thinking and working together between Western allies, and engaging also those countries who today hold a broadly neutral stance. Regarding industry, the first thing I would say is that our European industry is to a large extent what we've created through our governance and our military procurement systems, through their behaviours and requirement setting. So in the points I'm about to cover, a new form of leadership and associated values at the political, military and industrial levels will be essential to success. I offer some thoughts here on what industry would need to rise to the future challenge. Should be some, could you put my bullets up? Should be the next slide. Okay. You'll have to remember them then. These are the four elements, okay? Commonality, sustainability and mass, a sound framework, and strong leadership based on new values. So starting with commonality, I can hardly imagine what it must feel like as a Ukrainian soldier at any level to be offered lots of different Western systems of different types, all needing different logistic support chains, different training and different ammunition. At the operation and logistic level, non-commonality is a massive problem. Commonality, of course, is also vital for successful international cooperation, and I've sought throughout my career to maximise it at every opportunity I've had. Non-commonality is deep-rooted in our culture, though. Starting with our requirements setting, nations employ requirements staff to define national requirements. And the people who do this, not criticising them, it's just the way we breed them, we build them. They have their own personal experiences, and they base the requirements on what they know personally. They're trained in their own national concepts and doctrine. They want to give their own national forces an edge, esprit de corps and all that, it's all good stuff. And they want to be seen as fighting their corner for their own nation. So it's hardly surprising that it's very difficult to achieve common requirements in the current culture. So even when we do achieve cooperation, as we've seen from projects like NH90 with 12 national variants, this doesn't always lead to a successful cooperation. Requirement commonality must now become a fundamental principle of European armament procurement, at least across the whole of Europe, and the US is somewhat big enough to have its own critical mass. Commonality must always be the default, and this will present a huge leadership challenge, but we must face up to that challenge. Another reason we lose commonality is promotion of national defence industrial capability, the old work share, cost share problem. Hence, we have today in Europe different groupings to deliver the next generation fighter aircraft, for example, and I think we're going to hear some of that shortly. In my view, even if all European industries cooperated together and included other willing countries like Japan, we'd still face a huge challenge to create a viable sixth-generation multi-role fighter outside of the United States. So how do we solve this? The OCCAR Global Balance Principle, where we seek the best product through competition and view work share, cost share over all programmes over many years of time, has proved to be hugely successful, as the growing OCCAR portfolio demonstrates. But we need to go much further than that. There have been many, many studies on equipment specialisation in Europe. Today, we've not executed it. These are aimed at one common tank, one common frigate, one common fighter jet, etc. There have been some successes. The A400M, we could call it, it could be called the Common European Airlifter. And through the European Air Transport Command and its excellent work, it's practically achieved that. It's a superb achievement. The Italian-French Frem frigates are very common indeed below the surface. The European Mail RPAS is a good embryonic project for a single Mail RPAS multi-purpose across Europe. but the scope in global terms is limited. This now needs a massive push. The next topic, if you recall, was sustainability and mass. We do need to unlearn some conventional wisdom here. Many years ago, in 1996, I joined the UK Tornado Fast Jet programme. At that time, we had a total fleet of 250 aircraft, and we were losing them, attrition rate of 1.5 aircraft per year, with an out-of-service date of 2035. So I did some simple sums and worked out that even in a benign peacetime scenario, we could expect to lose 60 aircraft before the out-of-service date. I recall asking my new colleagues if we could just reopen the production line and make some more Tornadoes then, because it's going to be a problem inbound. Only to be told somewhat patronisingly that all the jigs and tools have been disposed of because they're charged as capital assets, etc. And this left me thinking, well, great, but what if there's actually a war? Why are we here? So we do need to absolutely reopen that thinking and ask those difficult questions. What if there's a war? Mass, the sheer numbers and supply chain of defence equipment, is a capability in itself, as we can all now see completely clearly. A big part of the solution here is also commonality. If we had standardised equipment, sustaining production facilities would become much more affordable. Imagine if all the Eurofighter and Rafale resource could be focused in sustaining just one aircraft type. It wouldn't be half the challenge it is for the Eurofighter nations and France that it is now. Indeed, with more cooperating nations and therefore investment up front, we could design for long-term mass production and surge capacity as we design equipment. A healthy downward push on production costs could even pay for itself in the longer term, especially when improved exports are factored in. And of course, improved exports may also help our much-needed engagement with those countries who are currently neutral to the Russian invasion, partly due in many cases to their dependence on Russian weapon systems. And coming back to the requirement space, we need to be much more demanding on cost, complexity and time drivers in production. We're all familiar with the various graphs of fighter jet production cost versus time, showing unit costs now moving into the multiple hundreds of millions of euros per aircraft for our future combat aircraft system. Well, if our €300 million FCAS is in the wrong shelter at the wrong time, it'll be destroyed by a paveway equivalent just as effectively as a €20 million aeroplane. And unlike the 15-20 million euro aeroplanes you'd get for the same money, it can only be in one place at one time. So digital technologies across design, production, testing and certification as well should allow us to drive towards an effective minimum viable product. And this must be our key goal. In other words, we've got to maximise bang for the buck. Sorry. This will require tough decisions, and it's counterintuitive to our current culture in the defence business. But the war in Ukraine, and looking forward to other tensions such as Taiwan, as we discussed earlier, it is no longer an option. And finally, a sound framework is the next thing on the list. Defence is the first duty of government, so a robust cooperative structure that provides confidence and certainty of delivery is vital. As a former OCCAR director, I should perhaps declare an interest here, but I do think the OCCAR framework provides all the vital elements. Global balance, as I've just said, providing long-term cross-programme view on cost-share, work-share, enabling us to select the very best that industry can offer in a competitive environment, while at the same time preserving the strategic balance that all of our nations need. Strong commercial and financial governance, ensuring the hold harmless principle that protects nations from the effects of changes in the planning and commitments of other nations, and an efficient cost model. For example, the OCCAR operating cost is only 1.5% of the overall programme cost. And finally, don't worry, I'm nearly there. Strong leadership based on new values. In my experience, successful international cooperation happens when we have strong and sustained leadership from the very top of participating nations and industry. Whenever I've seen scepticism or lack of commitment from the top, national staffs and programme teams see a ready excuse for any delay or failure. Bluntly, blame the other nations, blame the other nation's industry or the international programme team. Leaders at all levels need to show commitment, mutual confidence and respect, and work closely to hold their own staffs, the programme management agency and industry to account to deliver to performance, time and cost. This will require lean and agile, empowered governance regime and decision making, enabling rapid progress through an agile decision making system. In terms of new values, this will absolutely need to encompass a relentless best for programme view to select the very best common equipment for each capability space. This will require political commitment and courage from the top of government, driving cooperation, innovation, best bang for the buck and sustained high rate production capacity through the equipment life. In my view, the terrible war in Ukraine should act as a compelling signal to grasp these concepts and deliver higher capacity, more unified and more sustainable defence capability across Europe. Our industry can absolutely do it. They just need the right conditions and leadership in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for your suggestions. I always love sort of a set of concrete policy recommendations, so thank you for that. I think you also make a very important point about just the need of efficient delivery structures for the delivery of international collaborative programs. And I think we are having like a quite serious conversation, at least in the UK, around getting the right delivery and governance structure in place for this new sixth generation fighter jet program, which we call Tempest, Global Combat Air Program, FCAS, many names for it. But anyway, I think it's an excellent point and definitely like food for thought. General Rusi, you have worked as a defense attaché in Berlin in the past, and I was wishing if you could give us some sort of insight into the Franco-German defense relation, as well as just some context about the future combat air system program that we all know is underway, not without frictions. Progress is proving arduous because of the industrial divergences between partners. And so I was just hoping you could tell us how worrying is that, why is cooperation so difficult, and what can be done to sort of improve the implementation and just running of these big defense collaborative projects.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation, for the École de Guerre to invite me. So, just an opening remark, an observation. We are 27 member states, and we have 27 armies. So we have two different kinds of tanks and equipment in Europe. So what could be done? So the first problem, first of all, is there is a simple answer. Europe is not a military project from the beginning on. It's a political, it's an economic project, and later we began to speak of military matters. So we have developed a PSDC, of course. We have a EU headquarters in Brussels dealing with more than 22 different civilian and military operations all over the world. But that's all. And there is a fact that we cannot deny. Defense today in Europe will remain a national responsibility of the 27 member states, of each of them, with the European Council, with different type and size of army, different ambition, different perception of what the threat is. According, we are from the north, from the south, from the west, from the east. We have the same way of thinking and the same perception. So we have different equipment and different capabilities. Because we have different histories, 27 nations. So we have different conception of what EU is or should be. Each nation today has its own goal. What is the EU project? We have to, first of all, to answer that question. What is the EU project? Is Europe just an economic tool, an economic area, a political project? Or do we see Europe as a global player and a global power? So, so many different conceptions, so many different visions have a consequence. Today, EU is only a Europe of nations regarding military matters, I think, and we don't have, for the time being, perhaps never, perhaps one day, any federal project. Because when you speak of military matters, you have to answer that simple question. Who decides? Who gives the order? Go, we go. Today we are going to be deployed, we are going to do that. In France it's simple, but I have lived in Germany. I know that's not simple in Germany. So, today, unfortunately, it depends on each member state's goodwill. And it's more complicated with the rule of unanimity, and it prevents some projects to be adopted. So, can we change the rules? Perhaps, but not now. It will be a hard way to change the rule. And don't forget the standing shadow of NATO. NATO is considered, and that's a fact, that's true, the only reliable alliance able to protect Europe. EU military industry belongs to few countries, furthermore. France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the big countries. And other member states are not so affected when we are speaking of industry. And so they look towards USA and not toward Europe. That's a fact. And a lot of Eastern countries, for example, don't see the necessity to develop our own tools and assets and only trust NATO. So they don't hesitate to buy US military equipment. And even Germany, recently they bought the famous F-35 to replace the Tornado to be able to launch the nuclear bomb B-61. So, don't be afraid. America will continue to sell its own equipment and will continue to be a very important player in Europe in the next years. So, what can be done? It's first of all necessary to, sooner or later, to clarify what Europe is or is supposed to be. Simple area of economic exchanges, global power, as I said. And as long as we don't have a unique command, a unit ambition, it will be very difficult to harmonize our capability. Because it would mean simple, a federal army. So, are we ready to jump? I don't think so for the time being. However, whatever the difficulties can be, I can't help thinking that we've got some successes in Europe. It's not true to say that nothing happens. For example, we have this EU IRIS satellite system. It's a success. It's a satellite internet constellation to be deployed by the European Union by 2027 with a total budget of 6 billion euro. We have the Galileo system, 28 satellites. It's our own global navigation satellite system in Europe. We have failure as the European Defence Agency. We cannot say that it's a big success, that's true. But we also, OCAR, you were the chief, or the head of OCAR. OCAR doesn't belong to EU. No, but it's a multilateral tool, but it's a big success. And perhaps it means that today, the only way to advance is simply by or multilateral cooperation, even outside EU. It's the most successful way to cooperate. And OCAR has 16 different programs. Yes. 16. So you remember that many of them regarding aircraft, intelligence and communication, land vehicles, missiles, ships, and so on and so on. So that's not true that nothing happens. And the most famous one is the A400M, yes, where we are equipped with. And the Tiger attack helicopter too.
Very good.
Yeah. So That's not simple. So now, just have a look to a bilateral example, of course, the German-French cooperation, because it's more history of successes than failure. And I'll try to answer this question of cooperation in the light of my German-French experience. Of course, we have some failure. We have German-French tank in the 70s. It didn't happen. Okay. We have this maritime plane project to replace Brigade Atlantique and Lockheed P3, and Germany has recently decided to buy P8 Poseidon from Boeing. Well, so I think that's true. That project is dead. But I would remind you some successes to remind you that the German-French cooperation is very active, and we achieved in the past, not today, just in the past. We achieved following program: Transal, the famous Transal, German-French; Alpha Jet, German-French; Milan Missile, German-French; Missile Meteor, German-French. Perhaps with UK, I don't know. Perhaps.
Yes.
Anti-tank hot missiles, German-French. Anti-aircraft Roland, German-French. And Tiger and NH-90, A400M with OCCAR, German-French, in multilateral cooperations. Furthermore, the French Army has bought a German rifle, HK 416, and we have current project. And the first of all is the famous FCAS. It's the next generation fighter to replace Rafale in a Tornado Eurofighter. So it's a German-French cooperation with Spain too. It's a European combat system and under development by Dassault Aviation, Airbus, and Indra Sistemas. And it will consist of a next generation weapon system with swarming drones, for instance, as well as air asset in the future operational battle space, and a new generation fighter. It's a 6th generation jet fighter that is about 2040 will replace current French Rafales and Germany's Typhoons and space F-18. So everybody told it's a failure. That's not true. We go forward. We were to the phase AR. It's over, and now we have begun a test flight demonstrator. It's a phase AB, which will be ready by 2030 about. And this plane is supposed to be accepted to the service in the 40s, in the 30s. So it works, but that's true. It is difficult, and why it was difficult, and when I was attaché in Berlin, I had to deal with these difficulties every day, because Germany wanted to share. That's an example of difficulties of a bilateral cooperation. Germany didn't build any complete aircraft since World War II for historical reasons, and they wanted to share the industrial background. That is to say, French, you share all secrets with us because we are now partners and so on. Of course, Dassault system did not want to do that. Dassault only accepted to share the foreground. That is what we are going to do together, to build together, to create together. That is to say, the common and bilateral developments. And further difficulty, at the same time we began to discuss about the FCAS. German chose to replace Tornado by this F-37 to transport the NATO nuclear bomb. And this plane is to be delivered on 2027 onwards. It's a big matter of concern for France because of the ITAR, international traffic and arms regulation problem, and its connection with ESCAF, because it will be a challenge. Because from the French point of view, we will de facto hostages of the American technology at that time, and we will have difficulty afterwards if we want to export our jet and so on, because we have to get the agreement of the US government. And we know that it's not always the same. We will have US components, so that means that US is present in that project. So long for the AF case. We have a second project, the MGTS, Main Ground Combat System. That's a tank of the future, if you want. It's to replace Leopard 2 and Leclerc. So it will be a system of systems too, and developed by KNDS. And you perhaps don't know that KNDS is a joint venture of Krauss Maffei, constructor of Leopard 2, and Nexter. That means today, Nexter have half of Leopard 2 industry. And on the contrary, Krauss Maffei have half of the Charles Leclerc. It was a holding company founded in 2015. And the problem we had, that's a Rheinmetall, which at the beginning of this history is only a subcontractor, wanted to be part of the deal. And it was not foreseen at the beginning. So Rheinmetall say, I want part of the deal. He's a gun manufacturer, Rheinmetall, and control systems manufacturer. So it's difficult. And most of all, the program, as the FCAS head, we had tensions with Berlin related to industrial sharing, work sharing, because everybody wants to have the best, of course, of this equipment, because the lead is German. The lead is German, that's a fact. The lead is German, but in the lead, it's the lead, but it's a 50-50. It's a win-win relationship. So you have to get 50 of the benefits and 50 of the benefits. And of course, we have on one way you have Nexter, you have Krauss Maffei, and you have Rheinmetall. So this one third. How do you manage to make that a success? It's very difficult. So this project goes on, but is not dead, but not in very good shape, I would say for the time being. Not in very good shape, even though various countries have shown interest in joining this project, including Italy, Norway, Poland, and so on and so on. Eurodome, the OK Eurodome. We are going to build the Eurodome, medium mail RPS, and the project is OK. It works. We had difficulties at the beginning. One engine, two engines, so we have two engines, but it works. And the first flight is expected by mid-2027. So now some key explanation to understand the German-French relationship, and why is it so difficult, and why finally we achieve some successes. First of all, what I've seen during my 3 years in Berlin, there is a very sincere, a real political win to achieve these goals. A real political win, willingness to go forward. But, there is always a but, we have different ways of thinking, of course. Furthermore, we have national interest, selfishness, that's both parts. Every nation intends to cooperate, but wants the best for itself and to have the lead. So we have always, in this project, the problems of work sharing. That's the main issue. Furthermore, we have different political system, and it makes different misunderstanding. That means Germany is a parliamentary system. We have a federal chancellor. So his role is more to coordinate a great coalition. He doesn't have the power of the French president. So disputes and disagreements are very frequent between us. Because the French president decides, for example, if the president decides one morning we are going to engage one regiment tonight in Africa, we can have a regiment tonight in Africa. We perfectly know that in Germany it's a parliamentary system, and the parliamentary has to decide. So it needs a consent. It's a long way. That's the reason why the French one is a short loop system, and the German one is a parliamentary and a consent system, which needs a lot of discussions. So it's very problem. And the prominent role of the parliamentary in Germany related to military affairs and is very important, is to be stressed. And the powerful regional lobbying for shipyards, for example. You have, for example, in the northern of Germany, very powerful on the Baltic Sea, lobbying deputies and so on, who want to defend their shipyards and their own industries. That means even though the government agrees to make a deal, he has to cope and to find a consensus with the parliament. So it's perhaps for many countries is quite normal. In France, it's not the president decides more vertically. No.
Conscious of time.
Is that,
I know it's a very
okay.
long topic.
Well, so
the difference between France and
voilà,
Germany.
So I've
Go
already
further.
finished. Yeah. What is very important to the French way of thinking is the priority to capabilities. We must deliver to forces the assets they need. And in what I've seen in Germany is German priority to industry, to promote its own industry and to make money. That means to emphasize the weight of the industrial in the Bundestag. So, you know, it's a vivid example of a dynamic bilateral relationship. You see how hard it is in the everyday's life to achieve a project together. It's a standing negotiation requiring patience and time. So, quite to think if we were 26 more for the same projects. So you see the difficulty for Europe to develop its own tools.
Thank you. I think I quite like one of the points you make at the beginning, that before, knowing what to expect from the EU project, we have to define what it is. And, as a student of as a graduate of European Studies, I've been asking myself this question for like 3 years. It's quite funny that we still don't have an answer. But thank you so much for your insights. And since I've already asked my questions at the beginning, I would open the floor for questions from the audience. Paul?
Thank you very much for a really fascinating conversation. There's been a lot of discussion about mass in people terms and in equipment terms. I wonder if we could get your views on what actually the capabilities are that we need for which that mass is important. Are there things that the conflict in Ukraine has shown us that identifies weaknesses in the European battle, ORBAT, that we really need to be getting after now? Thank you.
The answer is yes, and very quickly. And I think right from ammunition, even gun barrels are a very critical supply item. And as I mentioned with my tornado example, today we've been planning for peace, and we've been scaling equipment for a peacetime consumption. And, we have to address that question, what if there's a war? And it makes a step change in production capacity. And that's why I think cooperatively, it now becomes an imperative to join our forces to get that production investment so we can surge and build things. Thank you.
Right.
Just a second point is that, of course, lessons have to be learned from the operation. We were talking about ammunition. Just give you an example of drones, for example. We were working on long-range, long-time drones, and we know that tactical drones now are used. They will be used 4 times, no more, and will be destroyed. So we need thousands, hundreds of thousands of drones. And this is a big change, for example.
As far as I know, regarding the ammunition and munitions requirements, for example, I think the last day we had an agreement in the EU to product 1 million. 2 billion. 2 billion. 2 billion. 2 billion.
2 billion euro to pay the stocks and the production of ammunition 155 millimeter. That's the 2 billion were decided on Monday.
Yes. And it means 1 million rounds, as far as I know. So the problem in peacetime we have is that we have just for training and for our operation, but with the operations overseas, as you know, and even in Mali or in Afghanistan, we do not need so big, huge stock, and we had a short budget, so it's always tense. And today, with the French productions of 155 millimeter rounds, with the today's productions, it would need 6 years to make the stocks again. 6 years. That's the reason why we've decided, the minister has announced, has decided to increase the production, and we will product 80,000 rounds only in France a year, related to 10,000, so 15,000, I think.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yes, I think it's for Tim. So do you think the special military operation in Ukraine has helped accelerate the mail air pass, known as Eurodrone program?
Has it? Sorry, say that again.
The war
Yeah.
has helped. Do you think that has helped accelerate the mail air pass Eurodrone program?
As we just heard, it will play a part, and there is absolutely a role for that kind of a drone. But as we heard, the smaller duration drones are probably the critical supply item right now. But yeah, absolutely, it vindicates the decision to do a cooperative mail RPAS in Europe, I believe. We just need the production capacity to make enough of them now.
Thank you.
I think we have a question over there.
Thank you, Charles Litchell. I'm one of the earlier speakers. The news this week included an EU peace fund announced by foreign ministers, which will include some new precedents on common spending capacity on research and development and on procurement. I'm curious about how the French participants feel about this, and also the British participant, and what potential opportunities there may be for cooperation in spite of events 7 years ago.
Anyone?
I think that any commitment like that is absolutely good news, and it's our job to turn that into a proposal that meets that political will. As we just heard, an OCCAR programme, it's an independent treaty. It's different to the NATO treaty. It's different to the Treaty of Rome. It's its own treaty. So OCCAR is a perfect vehicle to execute that kind of a programme. And I'm a very practical person. I would just write down a proposal and get on with it, really, and start really attacking some of the critical supply items using that fund.
Thank you, Tim. I think we have time for a couple of other questions. The gentleman at the... Yeah.
Good afternoon. Commander Paul Williams, Royal Navy, and a student here at the École de Guerre. You talked about commonality earlier, and obviously it spread across the panel's presentations. And we talked about the different political institutions, the military-industrial complexes for each country. Do we really think commonality is a realistic goal? And actually, maybe should we be looking more at something like the NATO standardization system, which is looking at more about how our weapons systems or our different types of systems might interface and might work together in the future?
Just when we're talking about commonality and we're talking about norms, we must be very careful, because within NATO, US is very powerful, and US can ask the people to have the norms which are US norms, and then European industry will be following the US. So we must be very careful. When I was working in NATO, very often I was saying, we are 30 nations around the table. We've got to take a decision together and not take the decision of one of the country, because then we will have difficulties. As I said at the end of my presentation, I don't know where will be the US in 5 years' time. But if their priority will be elsewhere than in Europe, the weapon system they are using will be elsewhere. And
Thanks,
so that means that commonality is important, but commonality has to be decided in common.
Yeah, good point. And if I could now just dive into my home territory of the equipment, the real risk is, even when you get a program, you have national variants, and then nothing fits, and all the parts and the logistics supply chain to Germany can only feed the German machine. The logistics supply chain to Italy can only do Italian equipment. So what we achieved with A400M was a common standard aircraft, and then you have nationally driven modifications to the configuration items to the standard aircraft. Anybody can buy a configuration item, and all configuration items are compatible with other configuration items. So the UK had a stronger ramp because it wanted to load a 32-ton armoured vehicle. UK wanted its own defensive aid system. Germany had its own defensive aid system. That's okay as long as you can take that off again and the company give you the instructions to take it off and put the other one back on. So the actual airframe is, the bare airframe of an A400M is absolutely identical across 6 nations. So the supply chain is absolutely, the logistics support chain, the maintenance facilities can all be absolutely standardised. And that's what we've got to protect. Unlike Tornado and Eurofighter, where we lost those things by properly national variants, with new projects, and I would think, Mail Alpas is one, we absolutely need to keep a common standard core product with national configuration items. And then another nation can buy into that amendment later on, and it doesn't detract from the commonality. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I am afraid we don't have times for other questions, but feel free to disturb our speakers while they're sipping champagne. I'm sure they'll be delighted. Thank you all for your attention, and thanks to the panel for all the thought-provoking contributions. Thank you very much.
So we'll now move on to our concluding remarks that will be delivered by one of my favorite people, who is Paul O'Neill, the Director of Military Science at Rusi.
You might want to say that until you've heard what I've got to say. But thank you. I'm also very conscious I stand between you and some champagne, which is a very dangerous position. But I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words. One, to do justice to the outstanding work that the students here have put in organising this. and the magnificent contribution of our panellists. It would be remiss of me just to say thank you and then dash off to grab a glass of wine. So I will hold you for a few minutes, I'm afraid. It is a great privilege for Rusi as a UK-based think tank to have such a deep and broad relationship with École de Guerre and École Militaire. So it's a real highlight of our year to be participants in this and a couple of other events that we do with the officers. And I think one of the things that's come out for me over the course of the day is that we are genuinely stronger in our diversity, notwithstanding some of the industrial challenges we have heard. But actually, when we bring different nations together to reflect on common problems, on common challenges, we often come up with a better solution as a consequence. So it is a deep honour for Rusi to be participating with École de Guerre in this event. I suppose in the context of learning lessons, there's always a danger of attempting to draw definitive conclusions when we're in an ongoing war. And I'm reminded, I don't know whether it's true or not, and you may know better than I, but there's a story about, certainly in the UK, about the Chinese ambassador being asked in the early 1970s what he thought about the French Revolution and was it a good thing? And he said it's too early to say. And I think one of the messages we've been giving in the UK Ministry of Defence at the moment is when they want to do a lessons learned from Ukraine, which they started 3 months after the campaign started, was don't rush to draw too many lessons, because quite frankly you will find anything that you're looking for, and it will only be in time that we can really distill genuinely enduring themes that come from this. And so I really am very pleased that the conversation today has not attempted to draw simple solutions to what is an incredibly complex situation. And without wishing to rehearse the entire day, because you really wouldn't thank me for that, the first panel I thought started off magnificently with that sense of a geostrategic concern and the complexity of war in an interconnected world. And whilst we may say that this is a territorial war, it's a territorial war in the context it may be waged over some territory, but actually its extent is much broader than the territory. It's a global impact. The strategic depth that Ukraine has got is very often going as far west as the United States and throughout the whole of Europe before you get to the Ukrainian border. That's their strategic depth. And I think it's a whole of society and a whole of government concern. We heard that it wasn't just military, it's economic, it's energy, it's information and social media, it's civil and military, it's industry, supply chains, geostrategic realignment of countries that we may not have anticipated making such significant changes in a relatively short period of time. So all of this makes war a lot more complicated. It was always complicated, but in a globally connected world, it's really important we think through some of those complexities and we understand our own role, and we understand the role of the military, because it's very easy as military officers, because you have the capacity, your departments are often the most heavily funded in your governments, not always, some health and social security may be perhaps higher than that, but certainly in terms of your externally focused departments, your defence ministries are pretty large gorillas playing around with lots of smaller rhesus monkeys that play within cabinet governments. So having clarity of what is needed, what is wanted, and what your role is really important. And one of the things that came out to me from the first panel is actions are not the same as effects. That came out in the context of sanctions. We rush to do some stuff with sanctions, but we're not necessarily sure of the effects that they're having. So we need to be able to think through, in the clamour of democratic politics, where the demand always on politicians is to do something now, is to genuinely have some time to think and reflect and decide what is it we want to achieve, how will we know if we've achieved it, and what's our plan B if we find that our first plan isn't going to deliver that. So environments such as this become really important in that context. I am going to say it, Swinza, Sun Tzu, depending on how you want to pronounce it, this idea of knowing yourself and knowing your adversary is really important. My concern at the moment is we focused on one adversary, although we have strayed into the potential concern in the Indo-Pacific. But who's looking out for our other adversaries? Because we don't want to be in a position where, after the next complaint, we say, yes, but actually, if you read the speeches of the leader, even so long as 2 weeks before the war, it was very clear that they were talking to their own constituency. This was a challenge. From my own service, I used to be in the Royal Air Force, we got rid of an awful lot of Russian linguists at the end of the Cold War because we didn't think we would need them and everyone was going to be a Dari or a Pashto speaker. We've reversed that, but what are we doing about these other specialists in our intelligence communities? What are the other countries we need to be looking at? I was going to make a rugby analogy, but as Les Blues beat the English rugby team, I shall pass on swiftly from that. The second panel talked about a lot of the modern aspects of war. And you could say in many respects this isn't a very modern war. Our former Prime Minister of two ago, which wasn't actually that long ago in actual time terms, but was saying about who can ever foresee the idea of a tank battle in Europe. Something he may wish to reflect on in the next short period of time when he has the capacity to do so. But the new challenges do open up, or the new aspects of war, information, cyberspace, do open up new challenges to militaries and societies. It requires new skills in our people. It requires new awareness for the military. It requires us to integrate the effects of civilian actors and military actors into our planning. And I thought a great point from Guillaume was about, we often practice in effects terms with Navy, armies and air forces, but where are we practicing with cyber? And indeed, can you even practice with cyber in that sense? Because once you've launched it, your adversary knows that you've got that capability and might close down the system. So what does that mean for our exercise programs, which are still very heavy metal related, I think? And then in the final panel, we spoke about mass. People mass, equipment mass. We spoke about the need for sustainability, commonality. We spoke about the relationships with industry, and not all industry is the same. Again, it came out of the second panel. The non-industrial primes are quite different to those we've traditionally dealt with. How are we building that level of understanding? And a point that came out right from the outset today, that level of trust that allows us to take some risk in order to deliver operational effect is so important. So I think at the heart of this is people and the organisations that need to deliver that. So it really is, as I said at the outset, a delight to be here at École de Guerre with the officers, with you as the participants, as people who are challenging yourselves to think about what some of this might mean for us going forward. The challenges of today in Ukraine, but the challenges we haven't yet seen that will be coming in the future. And I would just like to make the point, this is really important. Ask anybody in Ukraine, this is a matter of life and death. And we owe it to them and we owe it to all of our allies to actually take this seriously and think about it. So in that context, I would like to say thank you to all of you for participating, to those of you on the panels for stimulating ways of leading us into these kinds of thinking and these questions, and to all of you in the audience for participating. Perhaps most importantly to the École de Guerre team, to Emily and Malik for coaching the students through to this, but the officers themselves for putting on such a magnificent event. Congratulations to all of you. For those in the Navy, bravo Zulu. And with that, I will hand you back over to Emily, who I think is going to guide us to the champagne. Thank you very much.
So you're just going to have to listen to me for another couple minutes. So Paul, I did listen to what you say, and you're still one of my favorite people, so all good. So just to piggyback on what Paul was saying, of course, thank you to all of you in the audience. And you are part of what we would try to do with these symposium projects, meaning that we try and offer the opportunity to people other than military people to join us and have these discussions. My view, and I hope it's shared by many others, is that you can no longer have silos. Things are more and more intertwined, and we have to have these conversations with the military, in the military, but also outside of the military. And this audience today, I think, reflects that. We have people not only from a variety of organizations and backgrounds, but also from a variety of countries. We have very jet-lagged American friends who are sitting in the room today. We have people who crossed the channel and many others. So thank you very much to all of you, and we hope that to see you in the next edition of one of these events. As Paul said, thank you to all the speakers for giving up a whole afternoon of your life to be here and listen to us and listen to our questions and share your expertise and insight. I'd like to thank the moderators for doing a wonderful job of keeping everything on track. I really want to thank Rusi because this is organized in collaboration with Rusi, and that is part of the project, having the military officers engage with the think tank community. I thank, of course, and we should all thank them, the officers of the networking project who put together this symposium. So this project is about teaching the officers how to network in the Anglophone community and create a network within that community, may it be military or outside of that, and use that network to create this symposium. So congratulations for putting together such a great event. I'd like to thank Malik. So Malik is hiding in the back. I'm sure he hates me right this minute. So Malik came to us from the USA, and he coaches the officers in developing the networks, networking techniques, and how to become more interoperable with their English-speaking counterparts. I'd also, last but not least, want to thank those who work backstage who rarely get given flowers, so we'll give them their flowers today. So Marc Laurent, Corporal Leap, who does everything from the admin, the support, the logistics for all of these events. He does it with a smile, he does it quietly, he has an invisible cloak. I'm sure you haven't even noticed him today. And he is, as I said, a corporal enlisted, and he's one of the very rare people who has just succeeded in the first part of the competitive exam to become an officer, and that is quite rare for an enlisted. You usually have to go through the NCO part of the process first. And finally, you've seen them a bit more, but they've done an incredible job. The two interns that I currently have at the English Studies Department, Judy and Susan, who put a lot of what you saw and enjoyed today. So let's give them their flowers and join me in appreciating them. So now there's nothing left between you and Champagne, just a short walk. So the officers will guide you to the cocktail room. So we'll just create a flow of people that you can just follow. Don't get in the wrong flow of people, but we'll take you there and we'll enjoy a drink together. And please don't hesitate to continue the conversation and ask the questions you weren't able to ask.